paradrama tales.
She was pregnant, she was angry, and she said I was heartless for not letting her park on my driveway. But here's the thing. Just because I'm not using something doesn't mean it's yours to take, and standing my ground doesn't make me cruel. It makes me safe. It started quietly. The first time someone parked in our driveway, I thought it was a mistake. A delivery driver maybe, someone lost. I even waited by the window for a few minutes, expecting them to knock or wave or at least ask. But they didn't. They just walked away, like they belonged there. I told myself it wasn't worth getting worked up about. The car was gone a few hours later. The space was empty again. It felt temporary, harmless. But then it happened again. And again. 7 different cars in 2 months. Some came once, some returned like clockwork. A woman in a silver hatchback. A man with a flashy red coupe who always slammed his door too hard. A couple who argued before they even made it to the sidewalk. None of them ever asked. None of them ever left a note. Just parked and left, as if the absence of my car meant the presence of their right. And every time it happened, something small inside me tightened. At first it was just annoyance, then discomfort, then something closer to unease. I live alone. I'm 18, and while I've always been the independent type, there's a shift that happens when your space no longer feels like your own. You hesitate before stepping outside. You scan the driveway before unlocking your door. You wonder who will be standing on your property today. Not with violence, not with threat, but with assumption. That's the part that gnawed at me. The assumption. The silent decision that I don't count. That because I don't own a car, because I'm young, because the concrete happens to be empty for a few hours each day, I'm no longer entitled to decide what happens there. I tried to rationalize it. It's just a spot. It's not like they're hurting anything. Maybe they're in a rush. But rationalizing doesn't quiet the part of you that feels invisible in your own home. It wasn't just about the space, it was about the principle, that this is my house, my line between public and private, my name on the mailbox, even if no one sees it when they pull in like it's a free-for-all. So I started keeping track. 7 cars, 4 repeat offenders, all of them strangers, none of them asked. That's when I knew I needed to act, not because I was being petty, not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because my comfort shouldn't have to be sacrificed just to avoid making someone else mildly inconvenienced. The driveway may have looked empty, but something was starting to feel very full. My boundary, my patience, and my need to reclaim a space that was mine long before their tires ever touched it. So I bought a chain, not to trap, not to provoke, just to remind. That space may look available, but I am here, and that should be enough. I started to recognize them, not by name, they never gave one, but by car, by timing, by behavior. They weren't just strangers anymore. They were regulars, familiar shapes and unfamiliar routines. There was the woman in the silver hatchback, always arriving just before noon. She'd glide in like she owned the gravel, grab a handbag, and disappear down the block with her phone to her ear, walking like this was her neighborhood, not mine. Then the guy in the red coupe. His arrival was louder, doors slammed, music pulsed. He was always in a hurry, always parked slightly crooked, like he had somewhere better to be, and the shape of my driveway was an inconvenience rather than a gift. Then there was the quiet one, older, always in a blue station wagon, parking slowly, looking around with a cautious glance, but never enough caution to ask. None of them knocked, not once. None of them thought to say, "Hey, I know this isn't mine, but would it be okay just for today?" And I think that's what stung the most. Not the parking itself, but the entitlement that came with it, the quiet assumption that their convenience was more important than my comfort, that my home was just an unused space, not a lived-in boundary. They came and went like this was a public lot, not private property, not the front of someone's house, not the place where I drink coffee on the steps or bring my rescue dogs out back for air. Some even waved once or twice, mock politeness after the fact. A nod that didn't acknowledge me as a person, just a background detail in the setting of their day. It was surreal, in a way, watching people treat your home like terrain, not something owned or respected, but something passed through, borrowed without permission. Like I was just a shadow behind a curtain, like the driveway didn't count unless a car was already parked on it. I wondered how far it would go. Would someone move the trash bins to make room? Would they leave wrappers, or worse, come back to find the chain gone and demand it stay that way? That's how these things start. Not with confrontation, but with repetition. With people slowly normalizing your discomfort as background noise to their errands. And I didn't want to be background anymore. I didn't want to peek through blinds wondering who would show up this time, or feel a twist in my stomach every time I heard tires on gravel. So I kept watching, not out of paranoia, but out of defense. Because when strangers use your space without asking, it's not just an inconvenience. It's a slow erosion of presence, of ownership, of safety. And the longer it continued, the clearer it became. They didn't think they were doing anything wrong, because I hadn't told them it was. But I was done letting silence equal permission. People think safety is a door with a lock, but when you live alone, and especially when you're 18, that door becomes something else entirely. It's not just an entryway, it's a line, a signal, a wall you hope the world understands not to cross. And for me, it was getting crossed more and more. Every time someone pulled into the driveway unannounced, it didn't feel like a harmless parking decision. It felt like a presence, a shadow lingering too close to the threshold of my space. A choice I didn't get to make, but had to live with anyway. And it made everything harder, especially with the dogs. Their rescues, 2 of them. Skittish, protective, the kind that bark loud and growl low when strangers are too close. They were never trained to attack, but they don't trust easily. And I can't say I blame them. Taking them out to the backyard became a strategy game. I'd peek through the window, first, checking for unfamiliar vehicles. If there was a car, I'd have to wait. Delay the walk, rearrange my day. Or worse, risk a scene. Dogs barking, strangers staring. Me trying to explain why I'm nervous on my own property. There was one afternoon, I remember clearly. A woman had parked again, silver hatchback, the regular. I needed to take the dogs out. They hadn't been out in hours and they were whining, restless. I opened the door a crack, leash in hand, and saw her walking back toward the car, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, not even glancing at the house she'd just used like a public convenience. One of the dogs lunged, barked so loudly she jumped and glared at me like I was the problem, like I should have warned her before my own pets reacted to a stranger walking across our driveway. I shut the door, waited, heart thudding, more embarrassed than angry, but underneath the embarrassment was something sharper. This is not how it's supposed to feel to live in your own home. I shouldn't have to scan for people just to open a door. I shouldn't feel trapped in my living room because someone else decided their need was greater than my comfort. But I did. Every day. With every tire roll, every knock, every stranger who didn't think twice. And anxiety has a way of building not through panic, but through patterns. You start to dread the sound of rubber on gravel. You jump when someone walks too close to the fence. You wonder, what if someone tries to open the gate next time? What if the dogs get out? What if something happens and it's my fault because I didn't make it clear that this is my home, not public access? So I started to change the way I moved through my own house. I kept curtains drawn more often, delayed errands, shortened walks, watched the street more than I watched my shows. And that's when I realized this wasn't about parking. It was about peace. And mine was slowly being replaced with the constant hum of alertness. Because even if they left after a few hours, their absence never fully erased their intrusion. And that door I used to walk through freely, it didn't feel like a doorway anymore. It felt like a line I had to stand on guard behind. The idea came to me in the most ordinary way. I was brushing my teeth, standing at the sink, when I heard the sound, tires on gravel again. I didn't even have to look. I knew the rhythm by now. The slow roll in, the lazy brake, the car door that always slammed just a little too loud. I stood there, toothbrush still in hand, and thought, this is ridiculous. This is my house. And just like that, something in me clicked. It wasn't rage, it wasn't even frustration anymore. It was clarity. I was tired of explaining, tired of watching, tired of hoping people would choose to respect what they couldn't seem to even acknowledge. I didn't want to confront every single person. I didn't want to stand at the door like a security guard for a property I already owned. So I bought a chain, not the heavy-duty kind that says no trespassing in all caps. Just a simple one, steel, solid, with a reflective tag and 2 hooks. The kind of chain that doesn't scream, but holds its ground. I attached it across the entrance of the driveway. Nothing fancy, just a small barrier that said, stop, not yours. The first morning I walked past it, I felt something new. Control. I didn't have to peek out the window. I didn't have to brace myself for another uninvited presence. For once I knew, they'd have to think about it first. They'd have to choose to cross a line that now visibly existed, and that changed everything. Of course, I knew someone might still try. People can be bold, especially when they've convinced themselves that inconvenience equals injustice. But the chain wasn't just for them. It was for me, a physical marker of a decision I'd already made internally. I wasn't going to keep giving away my peace in exchange for politeness. I wasn't going to keep shrinking just to avoid being labeled rude or difficult. I had tried quiet tolerance. Now, I was trying something firmer. And the funny thing is, the neighborhood noticed. A few neighbors gave me curious looks. One even asked if something had happened. I just smiled and said, "Not really. I'm just tired of people assuming empty means available." He nodded, said he understood. That was it. No dramatic confrontation, no backlash. Just space. Finally. I could walk the dogs without checking twice. I could breathe when I opened the front door. I could sit by the window and not tense at every passing car. And it made me realize something I should have known from the beginning. Boundaries aren't built for the people who cross them. They're built for the people who need protection when no one else is watching. That chain wasn't about keeping others out. It was about letting myself back in. She knocked like she had every right to be there. 3 short, sharp raps on the door. Not hesitant, not polite, just entitled. I remember I was halfway through folding laundry when I heard it. My heart did that little jump, because when you live alone and someone knocks, there's always that flicker of what now? I opened the door, and there she was, probably mid to late 30s, sweating slightly. Belly pronounced, 7 or 8 months along maybe, and she was frowning, not in pain, in frustration. "Can you take the chain off?" she said, not asked. "I need to park." I blinked. "Sorry?" She pointed behind her. Sure enough, her car was idling at the curb, waiting. "I always park here," she said. "I'm pregnant. I can't walk far today." There was no hello. No? Would it be okay? Just a statement, wrapped in expectation. I paused, measured my voice. "This isn't public parking," I said. "It's my driveway." She folded her arms. "But you're not using it." And there it was again, that same assumption that had been chewing at me for months. That if something isn't in use, it's up for grabs. That my comfort, my security, my no didn't count unless it came with a visible, justifiable inconvenience. "I don't feel comfortable letting anyone park here anymore," I said calmly. "I have rescue dogs. They're anxious. And this is my home. I need this space clear for safety and peace of mind." Her eyebrows shot up. "So you're saying no? To a pregnant woman?" I didn't respond right away, because I could feel it happening, that silent emotional shift where the conversation stops being about the driveway and starts being about morality, about image, about guilt. She was sweating. She looked tired. She rubbed her belly and exhaled heavily, like she was about to faint from the sheer injustice of it all. "There's a lot a pregnant woman can't do," she said, her voice rising. "You really think making me walk 5 more minutes is fair? That I should pay for parking while you let your space sit empty?" I nodded, not because I felt righteous, but because I didn't feel small anymore. "You're welcome to ask a neighbor," I said gently, "but I'm not removing the chain." That's when the tears started, not loud sobs, just big dramatic drops, shoulders shaking, voice cracking. "You're heartless," she spat. "This world is so selfish. No wonder people don't help each other anymore. My baby deserves better than this." She turned before I could answer, marched back to her car, still crying, drove off without another word. I stood in the doorway for a while, hands still on the knob. Part of me wanted to run after her, offer something, apologize. Not for the boundary, but for the world being so complicated, for people being reduced to pleading in driveways, for everyone always being tired and scared and slightly more desperate than they admit. But I didn't, because another part of me, perhaps for the first time, understood this clearly. Pregnancy doesn't override permission. Need doesn't erase consent. And no one, no matter how vulnerable they look, gets to guilt you out of your no. I closed the door slowly, but her words lingered like smoke in the hallway. Heartless, selfish, cruel. They weren't shouted, just delivered. As if she knew they'd land better that way. And they did. I stood there with my hand still on the doorknob, heart pounding louder than I wanted to admit. For a moment, I felt like the villain in someone else's story. And that's the trap, isn't it? Guilt doesn't always come in yelling and fists. Sometimes it wears tears. Sometimes it wraps itself in a swollen belly and a trembling voice and says, "How could you?" And if you're not careful, you start to answer that question. You start retracing every word you said. Was I too cold? Did I sound dismissive? Should I have explained more? Did she think I didn't care about her baby? The thing is, I did care. I cared that she was struggling. I cared that she felt desperate enough to cry in front of a stranger's house. I cared that life had backed her into a corner where a driveway became a battleground. But none of that made her entitled to mine. It's a hard line to walk, compassion and boundaries, especially when someone knows how to tilt the moment in their favor. She didn't threaten. She didn't yell. She hurt. And she made sure I knew it. She turned my no into a failure of character, not a matter of safety or ownership. She made me feel like I was choosing between being kind and being secure. And for a second, I almost believed her. Because that's what emotional manipulation does. It doesn't demand, it shames. It makes you carry the weight of their struggle, their discomfort, their frustration, and asks you to solve it at your own expense. I've seen it before. Not always this obvious. Sometimes it's a coworker who just needs a little favor, a friend who says, "I thought you were better than that." A family member who asks for help with strings woven so tightly you don't see them until you're already tangled. But this was the clearest form it had ever taken. And it came wrapped in a situation where I was supposed to feel guilty just for saying no. It worked for a moment. It made me pause, made me doubt myself. And that's the part I think she counted on. Not out of cruelty, but out of strategy. She needed something, and guilt was her tool. Maybe the only one she felt she had. But I had to remind myself, my compassion is not for rent, and holding a boundary isn't the same as lacking empathy. I can feel for her, and still protect myself. I can wish her well, and still close my gate. I can see the weight she's carrying, and still refuse to carry it for her. Because the minute I start giving away space out of fear of being disliked, I teach the world that kindness is conditional, that it only counts if I give more than I can afford, and I'm done teaching that lesson. She drove off, I sat down, and I didn't feel victorious. I just felt still, which, after weeks of intrusion, anxiety, and guilt, I'll take. Stillness, I've learned, is what boundaries give you once you stop apologizing for having them. Before she cried, before she called me heartless, I tried reason. It was the last piece of me still holding out hope that this interaction could end like two adults parting ways. No yelling, no drama, just disagreement with dignity. So, I told her, as calmly as I could, "There's a paid lot just 5 minutes away on foot. It's safe. It's open. You'll find a spot there." She blinked like I'd just asked her to walk to another town. "That costs money," she said sharply. "I can't afford that." There it was, the pivot, from need to moral superiority. As if my refusal to offer her free space in front of my home was somehow robbing her child of a future. As if 5 minutes of walking, on a sunny day, with no medical emergency, was too cruel to ask of her. I reminded her, gently, that I live alone, that I have rescue dogs, that I don't feel safe with strangers coming and going as they please, that this isn't a public lot, it's my driveway, that the chain is there for a reason, and she didn't even pretend to hear it. She scoffed, rolled her eyes, repeated again and again, "But you're not using it, it's just sitting there." And that, I think, was the wall between us. Because to her, emptiness equals availability. If I wasn't actively standing in the driveway with a vehicle, then the space was wasted. My comfort, my peace, my dogs, my quiet, my right to say no, none of that mattered, not compared to her need, her inconvenience, her logic. What she didn't realize is, I understand struggle. I know what it means to count coins. I know what it's like to make trade-offs, to walk instead of ride, to carry heavy things home. Because paying for delivery wasn't an option. I've lived tight. But I never once thought that gave me permission to take what didn't belong to me. Her logic was simple. She needed it, and I didn't. But that's not how ownership works. That's not how boundaries work. You don't get to rearrange someone's life just because it would make yours easier. I offered alternatives, the paid lot, asking a neighbor. She dismissed them all because those required effort, because those reminded her that this situation wasn't truly desperate, it was just inconvenient. And inconvenience, when dressed in emotion, becomes a powerful tool of entitlement, but only if you let it. I didn't. And in that refusal, I saw something in her eyes, almost disbelief, like it had never occurred to her that someone would stand firm when she pushed this hard. I don't think she expected a young woman, home alone, to say no and mean it, but I did. Because sometimes logic isn't just what you say, it's what you live. It's choosing boundaries even when they make you look cold. It's sticking to reason even when someone else is playing the emotion card loud and shaky. I didn't know her space, but I gave her options, and she refused them. Because what she really wanted wasn't a solution. It was submission. And that was something I couldn't and wouldn't give. She cried, not the kind of cry that sneaks up on you, not quiet or private. It was theatrical, the kind of weeping that's meant to be witnessed. Her shoulders rose and fell, her voice cracked just enough. And when I didn't react, she cried louder, as if volume could break me. I stood there, one hand still resting lightly on the doorframe, unsure of what I was supposed to do. Was I supposed to apologize for standing my ground? Was I supposed to feel heartless for protecting my home? Because that's what she was counting on. That her tears would override my logic, that the image of a heavily pregnant woman, eyes glistening, lip trembling, would be too much for me to hold against. And I'll be honest, for a second, it almost was. Because I've been taught, like so many women, that being kind sometimes means being accommodating, that being understanding often means being quiet, that when someone cries in front of you, you soften, you yield, you give. But I didn't this time. Not because I lacked empathy, but because I finally knew the cost of caving. You give a little today, and tomorrow it's expected. You say just this once, and the line becomes blurry. You give up your peace, your space, your security, and suddenly it's not just a driveway that's being borrowed, it's your permission to say no that's quietly being revoked. So, I stood there, soft inside, yes, but firm. I didn't yell. I didn't match her volume. I didn't get pulled into the emotional script she wanted me to play a role in. Instead, I said gently, "I'm sorry. Truly." But the answer's still no. And that was it. No explanation, no justification, no attempt to make her feel better about being denied something that was never hers to begin with. She left angry, still crying, still muttering about selfishness and cruelty and people these days. And for hours after, her words echoed louder than I wanted them to. But here's what I realized. Her tears didn't make me wrong. They made her disappointed. And disappointment isn't the same thing as injustice. We confuse the two too often. We think someone else's sadness means we must have done something cruel. That saying no automatically makes us the villain in someone else's version of the story. But boundaries will always disappoint the people who benefited from your lack of them. That doesn't mean you remove them. It means you hold them tighter, even when they cry, even when they call you names, even when it feels easier to give in than to stay standing. Because peace, real peace, often lives just on the other side of discomfort. That afternoon, after she left, I made tea. I sat by the window, and I looked out at that chain across the driveway, still perfectly in place. It was simple, small, but it was mine. A line drawn not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And I was proud of myself, not for being cold, but for being clear. Because there's nothing more compassionate than showing the world how to treat you by treating yourself like you matter. Even, especially, when someone else is trying to make you forget that. I used to think that being a good person meant being available. That kindness looked like saying yes, like bending, like absorbing other people's discomfort so they didn't have to feel it. I thought boundaries made you selfish, cold, difficult, but now I know better. Boundaries don't make you unkind. They make you honest. They make you safe. They make you someone who tells the truth about what they need, even when someone else is crying on the other side of that truth. That chain across my driveway isn't just a piece of metal. It's a reminder that I am allowed to protect what's mine, even if it's empty, even if someone thinks they need it more, even if they try to make me feel like less for not giving it away. And if you've ever been in that moment, the one where your no was met with guilt, with anger, with tears, let me say something clearly. You are not cruel for having limits. You are not cold for honoring them. You are not heartless for saying, "This space is mine, and I get to decide who enters it." It takes strength to hold the line. It takes courage to stand still while someone paints you as the villain. And it takes love, real love, to treat yourself like someone worth protecting. So, if this story made you pause, if it reminded you of a moment where you didn't hold the line but wish you had, or maybe a time when you did, and you're still replaying it in your head, you're not alone. We've all been there. And here, we tell those stories out loud. The quiet ones, the complicated ones, the kind that don't end with applause but with clarity. If that's the kind of space you want more of, stick around, subscribe, leave a comment, share your story. Because the next time someone tries to make you feel guilty for having a boundary, you'll remember this. Saying no isn't the opposite of love. Sometimes it's the clearest form of it.